Bring the police and the army out against your own people, you declare war on your own people. And certainly he must rest assured, we will stand up. We will resist being treated like that. We will resist this ANC-led government failing to deliver electricity, failing to deliver basic services. The most important message that came from the national shutdown, probably the majority of people in this country has had enough.
Nkululeko on Cultr.
Fikile Mbalula characterized the shutdown as something that is somewhat anti-democracy, and he justified the presence of the military during the shutdown. You were invited by the EFF alongside the ATM and other political leaders to participate in that. What do you make of his statements as a Secretary General of the ANC to characterize it as something that is against democracy?
What else do you expect from Fikile Mbalula? I liked the summary what Comrade Julius Malema said about him when he said the guy lacks political insight and education. If he understood the Constitution, he would know it is our political right to participate in the shutdown. It's the political right enshrined in the Bill of Rights for people to march and to speak out when they are unhappy. Mm-hmm. But you see, Mbalula is not a principled politician. He is someone who talks for his supper. One day he will say one thing, another day he will say another thing. Mm. On the Friday before the national shutdown, he himself led a march in Tshwane. Then suddenly it was his democratic right. On the Monday, when the national shutdown takes place, suddenly it is not our democratic right. Suddenly he wants the National Defence Force and the South African Police Force to be brought out against the people. Now that is a very serious indictment on the Ramaphosa regime, but it is also a serious indictment on what the African National Congress had become. If you start identifying your own people, the people of this country, the nation, as the enemy, then you know that you're no longer representative of that nation, that you're now actually becoming a dictatorship because you declare your own people your enemy. That is what dictators did. That is what Pinochet did. That is what happened in Spain when it was a dictatorship. That is what happened in Chile when it was a dictatorship. That is what happened all over the world with dictatorships. And that is what South Africa is becoming under this rogue African National Congress. And I very deliberately say rogue ANC, because this is not the ANC that I joined. This is something else. It is a different thing. It has now become an instrument of oppression. It has become an agent of white monopoly capitalism and of imperialism, and it acts like that. The ANC is now acting like the policeman of the white people, and especially the white monopoly capitalists in this country. And that is what Fikile Mbalula should have understood, that when you bring the police and the army out against your own people, you declare war on your own people. And certainly he must rest assured that the people will not take that lying down. We will stand up. We will resist being treated like that. We will resist this ANC-led government failing to deliver electricity, failing to deliver basic services, failing to provide for the well-being of this nation. The most important message that came from the national shutdown is that a large part, probably the majority of people in this country, has had enough. No longer is the African National Congress and this government being seen as representative of the people. The message that was delivered is now we are going to speak up, we're going to stand up, and we are going to fight. What Mbalula was terribly wrong about was to try and frame the national shutdown as an illegal thing and at the same time as violent. That is propaganda rubbish. Violence was not part and illegality was not part of the national shutdown. I marched in the streets of Tshwane for 7 kilometers, zigzagging through the suburbs of Tshwane from Church Square to the Union buildings and eventually to the residence of the president. And there was not a single violent incident. You saw the videos, you saw the photos of how massive that crowd was. Well controlled, well disciplined. But the narrative that Mbalula and also the minister in the presidency of the South African government wanted to create was that there's going to be violence so that they can justify deploying the army and the police against their own people. Now, that's not telling the truth. That's telling a lie. That is sick propaganda. In the same line that the government believes it can go and tell transport companies, bus companies, who have been paid by the EFF to transport their supporters to the various points where the protests were taking place, to stop them from transporting those supporters, to even threaten them that they will lose government subsidies and tenders and contracts. What kind of government is this? What kind of democracy is this? Where can you say this and act within the parameters of a law? And I strongly support what Comrade Julius Malema said when he said the EFF is going to take them to court because they need to be taken to court and brought to book for all these illegal activities that they indulged in. The illegality of the national shutdown did not come from the organizers and the participants of the shutdown. It came from this rogue and dictatorial government.
Yeah, it seems as though there's the tables have turned somewhat. You could even say that it's full circle that what the ANC would be doing in the 1950s and 1960s, leading campaigns of civil disobedience, strategically not buying from certain stores so as to frustrate them economically so that the government could listen to them, compelling people not to go to work so as to not be domestic workers or minors, and affect directly an economy so that their voices can be heard. It is now the political parties and the people against the ANC, whereas 50 years ago it was the ANC who were at the forefront of those kind of marches.
Well, of course, then it was a different ANC. It was an ANC that cared for the people, believed in full liberation, advanced policies for also full economic liberation. As I said, this ANC that exists now is not the ANC that I and many other comrades have joined. So what you see is that the principles for true liberation, even the mobilizing strategies for full liberation, are not in the hands of this rogue, dead African National Congress. It is in the hands of the people. It's in the hands of all those political parties and civil society organizations that came together under that slogan of unity in action, which was really the hallmark, the trademark of the national shutdown. And that one should be very, very proud of. I think one of the greatest gains of the national shutdown is the unity in action that we are forging now between all the political parties and forces of the progressive left. And it is a watershed moment in the history of South Africa. I don't know if these commentators who try to write off the national shutdown because they get paid by the various television channels to peddle the nonsense that they speak, understand how important this national shutdown was. It was a watershed moment in the history of South Africa. The political narrative in South Africa has changed fundamentally. The power balance has changed fundamentally. The divisions that there were amongst the oppressed are now being healed. And we all know the old saying, it is through divide and rule that the oppressor rules. And when the oppressed people manages to bring themselves together and create unity amongst themselves, the oppressor loses control. That is what is happening now.
It's curious because it's true what you're saying, that there was a characterization of this in addition to the fact that it was anti-democratic, it was also that it had failed. There was commentator that was saying it had failed. Mbalula in his press briefing said that the shutdown was a failure. I thought that was curious because we saw a couple of things regarding particularly the availability of the electricity suddenly over a 72-hour period, which a lot of South Africans were asking questions. Why is it that all of a sudden, Saturday, Sunday, preceding the Monday, including the Monday, there was sudden availability of electricity, which is one of the things that people are demanding, that we should not be struggling with Eskom. I think it's interesting how that was characterized as failure, because if anything, it exposed that there is some sort of availability of electricity, and somehow you could infer that it is being controlled deliberately. It's being switched on and off deliberately for whatever reason.
That's true. And I think what we see, it was a revelation that there is, in fact, resources. Electricity is there to be provided and supplied. At the same time, we could see that the South African police service could be deployed. We have crime in this country, which is at the highest levels we've ever seen. We've got the highest murder rate and the highest rape rate in the world. And the police are never present. The police are not doing their job. But suddenly, when the national shutdown came, they were able to be mobilized. So what does that tell me? It tells me that there is not political will to address the issues of crime, to address the issues around electricity. That it is only a political will to try and destroy Eskom, to create an artificial shortage of electricity in order to dismember Eskom and privatize it. Because remember, Ramaphosa had made promises to the United Kingdom and also to Washington, especially when he went on the last visit to Washington. He told Kamala Harris and Joe Biden that he will make sure that Eskom is now dismembered. He asked for billions of dollars in order to provide these private power producers and also the so-called sustainable energy program, all of which is meant to undermine Eskom, to undermine state-owned enterprises, and to destroy the real base from which we can have energy security in South Africa. And that base is coal. We've got more than 300 years of coal resources in this country. We've got some of the best coal in the world, A-grade coal. But yet we are supposed to cut down on our electricity supply and energy security with regards to coal. Why? Because in Western Europe, they have realized that they need coal as an energy base. In Germany, in France, and the United Kingdom, they are recommissioning coal power stations and actually building new coal power stations. We have seen the pictures of the trucks loaded with coal going to Richards Bay to export our A-grade coal to those countries. So the intention is to destroy our energy security, to make us even more dependent on the Western and imperialist world, to make us a nation which is going to be in service of those powers, where our primary resources, our minerals, will be extracted at the lowest possible base price, where we will not be able to beneficiate those minerals because we don't have the electricity power to do so. And this is a well worked out plan. Now, all of that was exposed by the national shutdown because suddenly there was electricity. Remember in December, even during the holiday time, even during Christmas, we had high levels of load shedding. But suddenly in the middle of a working time, on a Monday, which was a working day, although they tried to say it was part of a long weekend public holiday. Suddenly they call it a long weekend public holiday. The government always argues that days that fall in between public holidays should be considered as full working days. Suddenly now, they could supply electricity. So they expose themselves for the frauds that they are. And you see, I have always said that the national shutdown success already was secured even before the shutdown on the 20th of March.
I agree.
Because in the week before, the only topic that was there for discussion was the national shutdown. The consequences of this electricity supply that was suddenly provided, the way in which the South African police service were deployed, all of that exposed this government for who they are. So even if we called off the national shutdown on the evening of the 19th, the Sunday the 19th before, it would have already been a success. And those who claim that it is not a success, they know in their inner chambers, in the discussions that they have behind closed doors, that this was truly a game changer. But they do not want to acknowledge that in the media. And the mainstream media should be ashamed of themselves, that they're allowing themselves to be used and abused to provide these propaganda messages, while there is clarity that this shutdown was a massive success. You know, ENCA had a helicopter that hovered above the massive crowd that was finding its way through the suburbs of Tshwane. They know that there were masses of people, thousands and thousands of people. But they go and report on their mainline head news that there were only 2,000 people in that march. Now, either they are mathematically challenged or they're busy with propaganda. And of course, it's the second. They are providing propaganda, despite the fact that they had that helicopter hovering there. You could never get a full picture of the full massive size of that march, because they kept on cropping it, they kept on taking angles to make it look as small as possible. Now, that is not journalism. That is propaganda, and that is propaganda coming straight out of the directory and the book of Goebbels.
It's interesting. I'm gonna ask you a question on national security and the deployment of the SAPS in a moment. But I do want to say this, that it's quite perverse, even the way that we report, particularly mainstream media, the way that they report successes and failures of things like protests. Because I think that you don't even need to run a poll to understand that there is a negative sentiment in the country. We are demoralized, the traffic lights are not working, businesses are closing down. I think even if one person went to the national shutdown, all of us are pissed off by the current situation. I think that the way that we're reporting on successes and failure is almost like a football spectacle, where we say that there was a dribble and there was a goal that was scored, as opposed to addressing the real issue. And I think that we should do better as the media. We can do better, because I saw in the morning of the national shutdown that the main focus was on the numbers. The main focus was constantly, overtly about the numbers. How many people are here? All right, it's still the first hour. We can see that not a lot of people have gathered here. There's nothing to report at the moment. I can see in the second hour there's only 100 people. That's perverse, because the national mood is negative at the moment. No one wants load shedding. And that alone should inform how we report. We know that there is a problem. I don't think that reporting on numbers is important. Why do you think there was a necessity? I know Ugogo Opremachekwi made an intervention on this, and he likened or linked it with the way in which the police intervention occurred in August 2012 in Marikana. That it is precisely the fundamental personality of this president that when the hits the fan, that's pretty much his tactic, that he would use or deploy the army or the police to deal with a perceived problem. Why was there a necessity for it? Because I don't think preceding or leading up to the shutdown, there was any threats of violence. Julius Malema spoke explicitly about the discipline that he requires from his members. He implored them not to be violent. He even spoke to journalists and said, don't talk about violence because we're not talking about violence. Don't ask me about violence because I'm telling my people not to do any violence. And you saying that with the march that you, in Tshwane, there was no violence for 7 kilometers, thousands and thousands of people. Why was there a need for SANDF and SAPS there?
Well, I think you've given the answer. It's about the personality of this president and the kind of propaganda messages that the African National Congress-led government wanted to put out. They desperately wanted to frame this protest as going to be violent and being anarchist. They also tried to frame it as being illegal, because in that way they could delegitimize, and at least within their minds, their warped minds, they thought they could delegitimize it by calling it violent and anarchist and not within the framework of the law. But the reality also is the answer that you've already provided. There's a deep sense of unhappiness and anger amongst our people. Yeah. And the community in South Africa know that this is nonsense. They know that this is propaganda. You see, this propaganda rubbish that is being dished out on our television screens are no longer working. It used to, at some stage, influence people's thinking, but it no longer does. I'm seeing it in the responses that I'm receiving now on almost an hourly basis on WhatsApp, on social media, everywhere. People are saying, we don't accept this propaganda anymore. We're sick and tired of the nonsense that they are dishing up to us. That's why I said to you that there is a fundamental climate of change. There's a watershed moment that we've reached. Mm-hmm. When you have a government that wants to use propaganda, when you have a big media industry that belongs to those who are the owners of the means of production in the country, and they think they can manipulate the national mind, and that fails. When the national mind no longer accepts the propaganda that they dish out to the nation, at that point, you've reached a tipping point. And in the sociology literature, it is clear. When you've reached a tipping point, you cannot return. So we've reached the point of no return. That's why I kept on saying throughout this whole last week, people mustn't any longer ask me, will Ramaphosa and his government fall? Will they go? That answer has already been provided. It was provided by the national shutdown. It was provided by the empty streets in the villages, in the cities, in the rural areas of South Africa. The only question that must be asked now is when. And the sooner it happens, the better.
Yeah, it's interesting. And it's interesting to watch this unfold because you wonder even how long will this, because 24 hours after the shutdown, we are back to stage 3. All of a sudden, everyone is subjected to load shedding. But yeah, thank you so much for. I wanted to talk about the shutdown.
No, but let me just
there's
say
something
this.
I want to ask you about the EFF. How are they able to bring about unity? How did that call come about, and what was your role? What is Mr. Vuyo Zungula's role? What were some of the other political parties? Because there was an angle to this to say that this is a political campaign by the EFF. We are a year before the elections, so this doesn't mean anything as it relates to the country. It's all about them. So the inclusion of yourselves and the ATM and other parties, how did that come about?
Well, I wanted to say, you asked the question, that the critical thing is that the people of this country are united. So it links with that question. Because the economic freedom fighters handled this national shutdown very well. They were not arrogant about it. When they announced it, they said that the shutdown is announced by them because someone has to take the lead. In any situation in life, someone has to take the lead. But they immediately opened the door for everyone to participate. And that was the message that was conveyed throughout the planning over the months in the run-up to the shutdown, let's work together. Let's bring unity amongst ourselves. So the economic freedom fighters have got the numbers. Evidently, they have resources that none of the other opposition parties in the progressive left have available to them. But they never acted with arrogance. As a very new organization, the African Radical Economic Transformation Alliance, we engaged with the leadership of the EFF, and they were totally open for us to participate and to give us almost equal status with them, which was remarkable. And they did so with the UDM, with the ATM, with the Pan-Africanist Congress, with all of them. And you could see that also in the way in which the march was organized. All the leaders came together. We held hands. We were walking there as a united force. And I was very impressed with how the ordinary rank and file young members of the EFF were responding to the other political parties. There was no arrogance. There was embracing. I was approached by so many members of the EFF asking to take photos with them, to do selfies. I had the most wonderful political discussions with them about what is the essence of the unity that we have to create. And that happened there while we were waiting to start the march at Church Square. It happened during the march. It even happened there at the gate of the president's residence. Incredible political discussions. So South African society is politically maturing by the day. It is showing great political insight also about how the West has captured our nation through Ramaphosa, and how this hollowed out Trojan horse that the ANC had become is being abused by imperialism in order to control South Africa. And those words I've just used, hollowed out Trojan horse, being abused, being used in order to try and impose themselves on the nation, are not words that I thought up. These are words that people who were in the crowd, who were marching, were speaking to me, were expressing. So there's a great political consciousness, and I give the EFF a lot of credit for that political consciousness that has been created in our society, and especially amongst the young people in our country. So the role that Julius Malema as the Commander-in-Chief of EFF played was a very, very progressive role. And I salute him for the manner in which he handled things. He never diverted from the core messages. The message of unity, the message of legality, the message that all the activities of the national shutdown will be peaceful and within the parameters of the law. And he didn't just talk it. They walked the talk. Because the reality is that despite all the efforts by this repressive regime to call it violent, to call it anarchist and all of those things, they cannot sustain the narrative. Because the truth of the matter is that it was legal, that it was peaceful, it was well-disciplined.
Let's talk about ARETA, African Radical Economic Transformation Alliance. What's your role in it? How did that come about?
Well, ARETA was formed by a broad base of South Africans who are deeply unhappy by what is happening in our country and the failure of the ruling African National Congress. A considerable number of members of ARETA were previous members of the ANC, like myself, or are actually still within the ranks of the African National Congress, but deeply critical of the ANC and the way it has sold out. So at the base of ARETA is that commitment to the true ideals for which we joined the liberation struggle. I always say I joined the liberation struggle not just because I wanted to get rid of apartheid and racism, of course, that was very important, but also because I wanted to see economic justice, because I believed what Comrade O.R. Tambo told us so many times on Radio Freedom, that racism and economic oppression dovetails. And full liberation can only take place when you don't only address the issue of racist oppression, but also economic oppression. And how racism in South Africa is shadowed, is in fact shown through economic oppression. So those are the commitments with which I joined 43 years ago, and many other South Africans who were part of the liberation struggle. Now, those are the core people within ARETA, because those are people who say, we want to be true to those original ideals with which we joined the liberation struggle. That is why we decided to call it the African, very important, African, because at the core of liberation in this country must first and foremost be the liberation of the African people. Radical economic transformation, because radical economic transformation has always been the economic policy program of the liberation movement and of the ANC that we joined. And then alliance. We very deliberately added that word alliance because we want to bring people together. We want to create a joint front, which is based on a minimum program of action to bring fundamental economic change. And we've listed what the main issues are: the return of the land to the people, expropriation of land without compensation, the nationalization of the Reserve Bank, the creation of the State Bank, bring an end to load shedding, make sure that our state-owned enterprises are protected, are grown and developed by government so that it can serve our nation, it can help to create jobs, it can help to uplift the majority of Black and especially African people. So those are the essence, principled positions that ARETA holds. And ARETA was formed in order to work for unity amongst the progressive left, in order to advance this program of radical economic transformation and to provide a political home to those many, many thousands, in fact millions of South Africans who originally associated themselves with the liberation ideals of the liberation struggle, and today feel that they have been betrayed by this rogue ANC, which is no longer the ANC of the past, the erstwhile ANC, and feel that they need a new political home, which at the same time continues to carry forward the same liberation ideals, the same political principles that they originally joined the liberation
What
struggle
does the
for.
leadership structure look like?
Within ARETA, we've got a very small, what we call a working board. That exists only of 4 leaders. Myself as chair, Comrade Sealitata Mzaidume, who is a very powerful young woman leader from the Eastern Cape with a long history in the liberation struggle. Her mother was Dolly Mzaidume, who was a member of Umkhonto, who dedicated her life to the liberation struggle. Comrade Nkosazana Shashezi, who is in KwaZulu-Natal, who has been always a strong proponent of radical economic transformation. He is the secretary. And then our treasurer is Comrade Faisal Musa, a comrade who had been in the liberation struggle and Umkhonto for many decades, who is part of a family that had been in the liberation struggle for many, many decades. His father was Judge Essa Musa, the very well-known human rights and radical lawyer. So those are the people who give the leadership at this stage to ARETA. And we very deliberately call it a working board, because we do not want to consider ourselves to be a leadership elite. We do not think that we should sit on top and act there as if power and leadership is bestowed on us. We want to roll up our sleeves. We want to work hard to build a mass-based organization which must be structured at a national, at a provincial, at a regional, and at a local level. And at the moment, the working board of ARETA is working hard to establish the provincial structures for ARETA, which will also be working boards in every province. And those working boards will have as their duty that they must now manage to bring together the large number of people who have already joined as members of ARETA and structure now regional structures and especially local structures, and eventually it will devolve down to the level of branches. We've only opened for membership on our website for the last 2 weeks, and we've already got tens of thousands of people who've joined. So ARETA is one of the fastest growing political organizations in South Africa. And for me, the indication of that growth is that ARETA is an idea whose time has come. People feel that they resonate with the liberation ideals that we explain that we stand for, because they can see the historical liberation roots in those ideals and how we carry it forward into the current context of South Africa. And those members who've joined tell us all one thing: we want unity. We love it when we see all of you as the leaders of various different political organizations and civil society organizations working together, walking together. There was a lovely photo of myself, Comrade Julius Malema and Comrade Mzwanele Manyi walking together as part of that row of leaders who were leading the march. That photo went viral. It went everywhere because people were feeling that that photo was expressing something that they truly were thirsting for, that they wanted. They wanted to see that unity among us. And that photo was for them the personification of the unity that we're beginning to achieve. So ARETA is going to work very, very hard for forging unity amongst all the progressive left forces in South Africa. You know, in the run-up to the national shutdown, and even while we were still putting the various foundational bricks in place for the launch of ARETA, I met with all the various left political parties. I met with the ATM several times. I met with the UDM, with General Olemisa, several times. With the Pan-Africanist Congress, in fact, I've got a standing arrangement with the deputy president of the PAC to meet him once a week for us to discuss about how we will forge unity. So all of this is happening. And we have given ourselves a duty as the working board of ARETA to play a critical role in creating that foundation for unity, eventually come to the point where we will have a minimum program of action, which would make it possible for us to take this government, the ANC, on in the 2024 elections. And if we are united, we will be able to beat them, and we will be able to establish a new democratic people's progressive government that will implement radical economic transformation.
Yeah, I think it's a formidable challenge. I think, in my opinion, it's a formidable challenge. I've been curious over the last 14 years about the rise of new political parties, how long they last and why those that last. For example, if you look at what shaped the formation of COPE in 2008, was of course the dismissal of President Thabo Mbeki at the time. A lot of leaders within the ANC moved, and then COPE was formed. In fact, they punched way above their weight in 2009 in those elections, because there was a shift, there was a movement, and there was a mood that was accompanying the rise of a COPE. And they did well in the first elections, and then they dwindled out or fizzled out in the preceding 5 years to 10-year period. And if you look at the case study, which is the EFF as well, It's the expulsion of the leaders, the young leaders of the ANC Youth League. They formed the EFF. What you see there also, the pool is largely with the personality. So if there's a huge personality was negatively affected within the ANC, you can see that perhaps there is a direct proportion with the number of young people or people that will be inclined to join. But if you look at a different case study, which is maybe Ahang, you look at different case studies which is other political parties which didn't last more than 5 years, you would say that almost consistently you need that one big leader or that one big moment that occurs. With those limited case studies over the last 14 years, it's very difficult to start a new political formation for various reasons. For you, what are you relying on with the numbers? You're talking about the numbers, like 10,000 of people on the website already. Are those people that you can call to a meeting and they could come? Are those people that you can mobilize and say that we're marching or we're gathering for a specific cause and they would definitely come? Because it's very, very difficult to build a political party. Just on observation, I've never run a political party. Just on observation in the last 14 years, there's very few that really stand the test of time. And they're usually sparked up by events. I know that Action SA, I'm not really that interested in that because they seem right-wing-ish. So I'm not really interested. I don't know what happened there. Maybe there's money there. That's maybe explains why they had some popularity. So it's a challenging undertaking that you're going through now. How are you going to make sure that they get at least 1% next year, or 5% next year, or 10% next year?
It's going to be much more than 5 or 10%. And I'll tell you why I'm confident. I'm confident because we do not intend to be the kind of reactionary party such as Ahang and also COPE was. COPE was in reaction, and it never managed to get beyond the reaction.
Yeah.
My answer to you before you asked this question was all about principle and about policy. It was not about personalities. It was also not that we are in reaction. I'm not that much interested all the time to talk about the African National Congress. The ANC has destroyed itself. As I've said before, it is dead. What I'm interested to talk about is the policy program of the African Radical Economic Transformation Alliance and the practical implementation of that policy program through unity. So unity is critical. The 10-point plan that ARETA has developed, which is there as the first thing that you see when you open the website of ARETA, and the way in which we are rolling out this organization. We are not rolling it out in a rush. It's taken us almost 3 months before we launched. We started a conversation. We said, we've had a problem. The original liberation ideals that many of us dedicated our lives to are being betrayed. So that's how the conversation started. Then we had huge Twitter spaces, 35,000 people participating, talking about that issue. And over a period of time, almost 2 months before we got to February, when there was a decision taken on a Twitter space where there were 25,000 people present, saying we need to create an organization which will express these ideals for radical economic transformation. And the next thing we did was not simply just to form the organization. We said, okay, what would be the most important basic building stones that we need to do this? So we concentrated on policy, on ideology, because I've always maintained that the death of the African National Congress was because of the death of ideology in the ANC. When the ANC lost its liberation ideology and started replacing that with a policy of money and of being a sellout to white monopoly capitalism and imperialism, it died. Because then the quality of the people who joined changed. The people who joined didn't any longer join the ANC for political and ideological reasons. They joined because they wanted to fill their pockets with money. They saw it now as a business decision rather than a political liberation decision to join the ANC. So what we did is we started the discussion about what is the basic 10-point plan that we need. Once we concluded on that, and when I say conclude, I don't mean we shut the discussion down. Mm-hmm. It is still an open-ended discussion about the 10-point plan, but we've put basic directions there, basic indicators of what should be the 10-point plan that we want to promote. Only at that point did we then reach a proper enough situation where we could say, okay, it's time to create an organization. And then we went through a period where we had a working name for the organization. Mm-hmm. We then said, let's the final name of the organization reflect the essence of what this organization should be. As I said to you, it should be African. It must implement radical economic transformation, and it must work for unity, so it will be called an alliance. And that is how ARETA came about, very differently from the knee-jerk, reactionary approach that there was from Cope and also from Agang. And that's why ARETA is going to succeed, because it is ideologically well-grounded. Mm. At the same time, ARETA does not believe in elitist leadership. It does not believe that there are a group of leaders, as there seem to be now within the ANC, who think they have a God-given right to lead. Leadership is bestowed on them. We don't believe that. We believe that those who are leading ARETA should be people who are going to work, who are not going to act as if they are royalty, are rolling up their sleeves and are going to be out there sweating it out. That's why we didn't make it a big issue to get high-profile, so-called elite leaders, so-called people who are celebrities. Mm-hmm. No, we wanted people who are going to work and lead this organization, and that is exactly what we do. And it is the same approach that we are using at the provincial working boards, and that will happen right throughout the organization. Yeah. Because if we do not make political ideology the foundation of ARETA, we will fall into the same trap as all these other wannabe organizations who flared up and died within the shortest possible period of time. And that is why I started my answer to you to say, I believe that ARETA will be doing much better than 10%. Yeah. We will do very well because we are going to be an organization giving expression to the will of the people and the ideals that the people want to see put on the forefront, on the front burner of the political agenda and discussion in South Africa.
I think, Carl, to be fair, the same thing could be said by a lot of other political parties. I had Mr. Vuyo Zungula here, and we had a great conversation. He's a very likable gentleman.
Very likable man.
Yeah. And we spoke at length about, we're talking about the concept of there's a direct coefficient or direct relationship between what you receive at the end of the election campaigning, the percentage you receive, versus the money that you put in as well. I think all of them, not all of them, but there are a lot of political parties with solid plans about what their manifestos mean or their constitutions mean. They're specific about the land question, specific about expropriation without compensation, land bank, reserve bank, and all of that nationalization. But it still is a very difficult undertaking. It's very difficult to get 10% in an election if you don't spend the equivalent of maybe 50 million or 10 million or 30 million. Like, you must have that behind you. And Vuyo Zungula admitted that, you know what, the realistic expectation for them next year is to move from 2 seats in parliament to maybe 10 seats in parliament or 5 seats in parliament. So somewhere in the region of 2% to 10%, which is still like a steep objective. Of course, you're allowed to, to have goals and be ambitious, but when you realistically look at it, there's a fundamental relationship between money and what you receive at the end of the campaigning. And I think that's where I want to get at with you, that what you explain as the objectives of ARETA is similar to what other political parties, particularly those that are not reactionary. I mean, if you look at ATM, if you look at PAC, if you look at BLF, I think that there's even an overlap in your objectives, right? And they would say that their policies are solid, their founding documents are solid, but there is still a difficulty. The BLF couldn't find a single seat last time around. So it is a very difficult undertaking. I'm not trying to deter you when I say that, but I think as I'm asking you these questions, it's a realistic question to ask that. Do you think you can get 5%, and how do you think you're going to go about that? I don't think it's sufficient to only have solid policy documents. I think the EFF had a founding manifesto that had 7 points. They give it a name. I forgot what it's called. 7 cardinal pillars. Yeah, they call it that, right? And they think it's solid, but where it gets them is somewhere between 8 and 12%. But that you could ask them or do an audit, a financial audit, you could find that they spent a lot of money on elections, tens of millions on election, so that they can get an equivalent of 8 up to 12%. So that's a very difficult one.
Look, you're right to say that it is not easy. And when I made the statements that I've made just now in terms of what my intention and the intention of the working board of ARETA is to grow ARETA, I didn't do so without knowing the difficulties. In fact, while Comrade Julius and myself were walking hand in hand, I said to him, "You've done very well." He said, "Yes, but it was very difficult." And he then said to me, "And I think you guys are doing well, but you're going to find out how difficult it is." I agree. And I can tell you, one of the biggest tasks that I've given myself and the board is to find money. It's very important to have resources. But for me, the way in which we find the money is just as important as the resources. And that is why I've consistently said I want to see crowdfunding for ARETA. I want to see a large number of people showing their commitment. You asked me earlier, do you have members who are prepared to come out, fill a stadium, march? Of course, we are in the process of getting that membership. But for me, very interestingly, is when we originally opened the membership, we said to the members, we're not yet bringing the bank account. You join. We will later on ask you to put in your nominal fee as a member of the organization. And many people called me and said, no, we want to pay now. We want to show that we have a commitment. The very important thing to understand is that the political climate in South Africa has changed fundamentally. Our people have reached the point where they said they've had enough. And that had enough comes also with a message: we are prepared to now make the contributions and to make the sacrifices that are necessary to change, because we can see how our lives are being destroyed. So we're going to work to get the money. But I'm definitely not planning to have 1 or 2 big funders who's going to give us 10 or 20 or whatever number of millions of rands. And then we become beholden to those funders. One thing that must never happen to ARETA, it must never become captured by funders. But yes, we need money. I would like to see a diversity of funders rather than 1 or 2. And I would like to make sure that whenever we engage with those funders, it is clear that we will not compromise on the basic policy principles that we stand for. And that is why it is so important that right from the beginning, we worked on policy even before we started looking for funders. even before we decided on who the leaders are. Everything must flow from the political principles and political ideology that we stand for. Even the funding must flow from that. Even the manner in which we look for funding must flow from that. And as long as we stay clear on that foundation, I believe we will succeed. You spoke about your discussion, your interview with Comrade Vuyo Zungula. I agree with you. He's a great leader. I've got the greatest respect for him. The manner in which he handled the whole Phala Phala Farmgate scandal, the manner in which he was the main person that made sure that that independent panel was eventually appointed by Parliament. I think if it wasn't for his leadership role and the principled leadership positions that he took, we wouldn't have seen even the situation that unfolded in Parliament, although eventually the corrupt ANC managed to protect Ramaphosa. But Ramaphosa stood exposed by that independent panel, and Vuyo Zungula played a central role in achieving that. As I said to you, I'm engaged closely with the ATM. And the ATM is one of our close partners in this movement in order to create unity and have a united front.
Yeah.
So I'm very happy when you say to me, there's ideological overlap between your organization, between ARETA and other political parties and organizations. That is good news, because that gives us the opportunity to build a united base, to build that minimum program of action, because we already have similar programs. We can now work together. And when I talk about the possibility for such an alliance of united progressive left parties to take over the government, I'm meaning exactly that, an alliance. I'm talking about coalition, but coalition in a very special way, built on the basis of ideology, not on the basis of personalities, and not on the basis in the first instance of what kind of job you're going to get. The coalitions that we've seen in metros constantly fall apart because the first thing that those coalition partners think about is who's going to become the mayor, who's going to be on the mayoral committee, what job I can get. What we say here is build the coalition, build the united front on policy, and make sure that you succeed with that foundation, and then move forward. And that's the message that we are delivering to the people of this country.
It's interesting, the message of unity, because I've been exploring it recently in all of these interviews that I've been doing, particularly political leaders like yourselves. I've been asking a specific question about what does that mean. I think I'm getting a clearer picture as I'm speaking to you, that perhaps in that government of national unity, there will be a left-leaning bloc which perhaps has 20% of the total election or 30%, and they speak with the same voice to say, look, we are going to go to a union with the ANC or anyone who has who needs that 20%, but will say this is our minimum program.
And the minimum program will be decided on before the elections. That's very important. So when we move towards the elections, we know already what is that minimum program of action that all of us will be united on, so that we don't start a horse trading circus after the elections had taken place. But we know that as a united force, we can move forward into these elections. And those of us, yes, we may be there as the various political parties still participating as those parties with our identities in the election. But we're clear that we've got a minimum program of action, which we carry into the elections, and the electorate knows that all of these parties have been together, they have a minimum program of action, and after the elections, they will form a united front to form a government or to be part of a progressive coalition government. And if we do that, you see, what is very important for me is we must stop lying to the people. That kind of approach is honest, because you do not present to the people a story that you cannot articulate and you cannot eventually carry off. You go there and say, this is what we intend doing. This is the minimum program of action that we have. These are the parties that are working together. And we intend to work together after the elections. So when you give a vote to ARETA, if you give a vote to the ATM, to the UDM, to all of those parties, you also give a vote to that coalition alliance of progressive forces. And you know that they will jointly move into government. And in that answer of mine, I've already also given you the answer about the future of ARETA. We started off as a NPO and NPC. We registered as both. But we did say our intention is to be a very active political player. And our membership are telling us, in fact, every day I get messages, when are you registering as the political party? So I can say to you today, we are definitely going to register as a political party. We will enter the era of the 2024 election campaign as a political party, marching together with all these other progressive left political parties.
All right, thank you for that. This is an interesting one because on the one hand, you are ARETA. On the other hand, you have a very close kinship with former President Jacob Zuma, who's clearly an ANC man.
Yes.
He's never pronounced otherwise. You were there to support him in Pietermaritzburg with the current case, Karen Moen and beat it down, right?
Yes.
Now, you are a leader of a political party. You've just announced that you will be part of the elections to support another former leader of another political party. How do you juxtapose that? Because it will be like Julius Malema going to support Jacob Zuma, Julius Malema of the EFF going to support an ANC's Jacob Zuma. Although, of course, there is a relationship. The context is that you have a very close kinship to former President Jacob Zuma. But now that you want to identify yourself as a singular political party separate from the ANC, how do you juxtapose that, even from how it looks aesthetically?
There should be no dichotomy. There should be no juxtaposing. President Zuma has stood for the ideals that many of us stand for. President Zuma was the one president since 1994 that tried to bring radical economic transformation. But he was prevented. He was put in a straitjacket. He was attacked from the moment that he entered the union buildings until the moment that he was eventually forced out. You're quite correct to say that I've got a long and close relationship with President Zuma, both politically and personally. So my support for him is both, because in my view, the political is personal and the personal is political. And there is no problem with me being a member of ARETA, being also the chair of the board of ARETA, and supporting President Zuma when he is persecuted in a very factional and political way with the arms deals case, and when he was the victim of criminal activity by Karen Moen and by Billy Downer, with his medical records illegally having been leaked and published, for me to support President Zuma. I've never asked of President Zuma to leave the ANC. I understand the long history. I understand President Zuma's commitment to the African National Congress, but I also understand the ideals that President Zuma stands for, and I know that those ideals are very, very close to the ideals that ARETA stands for. So why should there be any contradiction in me and ARETA supporting President Zuma when he is being persecuted and say what is being done to him is wrong, is politically factional, and is in fact wrong in terms of our constitution and the law? That is what I've done all the time. That is what I will continue to do. That is why when President Zuma now was going to court with this private prosecution against Karen Moore and Billy Downer, ARETA issued a statement and a poster saying, we support President Zuma. Yesterday, when I was standing there shaking his hand, President Zuma knew that I'm standing there as the chair of ARETA. I know that I'm shaking the hand of President Zuma, who had said he's not going to leave the African National Congress. But we still share those ideals. And we can still move forward as people who want to see the liberation of our people in this country. There is no contradiction whatsoever. I continue to talk to many members of the African National Congress who are deeply uncomfortable, unhappy with what is happening within the ANC. And those members, I am sure everything I've said today indicate that I hope that eventually they will come to ARETA, that they will join us, they will share those views, ideals, ideology that we are expressing. But if they decide to stay within the ANC, we will look at them. We will not fight with them because we know they are not the people who are really now representing and actually giving the real view and the real position of this sellout African National Congress. My battle are with those who have sold out the original ANC, the original liberation movement. And those people and that fake rogue organization that has resulted, I will take on head on, unapologetically. And that is exactly what ARETA is going to do. And that is exactly why I'm working for this alliance between left progressive forces, to take them on, remove them from power, because they're bad for this country. They are exploiting our people. They're even exploiting the goodwill of the people and the love that the people had for the erstwhile African National Congress. They're even exploiting the colors and the emblem of the ANC because it no longer stands for those same ideals. As I've said before, they are a Trojan horse. And you know what a Trojan horse is. It is a hollowed out rogue vehicle which is being abused, creating the impression of something it is not, in order to eventually capture a people and a nation.
Do you think tactically, are you not hamstringing yourself? No. So let's say that there's, in the next 2 years, there are maybe 20 court appearances that former President Jacob Zuma has to make with various pending cases that are ongoing. Every single time you are seen there, are you not seen as a Zuma proxy, therefore this is a Zuma party?
Not at all. I've never been...
Tactically.
No. You see, for me, principle is the most important thing. That's why I've explained right from the beginning to all my comrades and to the nation that I support President Zuma on principle and on personal relations. That does not mean that I am President Zuma's mouthpiece. That does not mean that I'm a chess piece on a chessboard where President Zuma is playing a chess game. I'm there on principle that President Zuma is being treated wrongly. And because he's being treated wrongly, I support him. That is what I mean when I say one soldier does not leave another soldier behind on the battlefield. And it's a very deliberate phrase I use. Because it recalls the fact that both President Zuma and myself are former members of Umkhonto. We have a joint history. And that joint history means that we are comrades, even if we may have different political, strategical positions that we take. And I will continue to do that. No one will ever tell me that I must not, on a basis of principle and of personal friendship, support President Zuma with the persecution that he's being subjected to. And I can separate those two things. There is no tactical problem in doing so. And I'm sure that my supporters, the membership of ARETA, all understand this. In the broader political context, people understand it. There are those who will deliberately and maliciously trying to misinterpret it. But I'll take them on. In the same way that I explained to you here today, I do not betray friends. I do not run away from fellow comrades. I'm not a fair weather friend. I will never conduct my politics on that basis. If I was going to now suddenly put distance between myself and President Zuma because I think that would be a nice strategy to promote ARETA, you should be worried about me. Then my supporters should say, hey, comrade, you are an opportunist. You are playing opportunistic little political games. I'm not going to do that. I will stick with my friendship. I'll stick with my comradeship. I'll give President Zuma my support. But that is not meaning that ARETA in any way now suddenly is an extension of President Zuma. In the same way that I've supported Comrade Ace Magashule, Comrade Zandile Gumede, and many other comrades, Comrade Bongo, all of them, I go to their court cases. Am I now an extension of them? No. Am I now suddenly their pawn? No. I have always been my own person. I've always been someone who speak for myself and have my own political understanding. I'm no one's pawn. And ARETA is not going to be anyone's pawn. But ARETA is also not going to be an opportunistic organization, throwing people who are being treated unfairly under the bus for the sake of political gain. That's not the way we operate.
Mm-hmm. All right. Yeah, we have a few minutes left. I want to quiz you on next year's projections. Next year seems interesting because however way you cut it, the African National Congress is going to land somewhere between 35-40%, 40 to 45%. However you cut it. They're not going to suddenly go from 55% to zero. However you cut it. People are still going to vote for them. If anything, people are just deciding not to vote, which doesn't do anything other than maintain the numbers to where they were anyways. 8 million people turned their backs on the elections. It may be 5 million more people turning their backs on the elections. The DA, because 10% of South Africa's population is white, somewhere between 9 and 10%, and then there's an Asian community, there's a colored community as well. I think that there's almost a natural alignment to the DA. It explains why their numbers are always somewhere between 15 and 25%. They will land where they usually land, give or take 5% more. So you're looking at a possibility. So the alliance, if we were to assume that it lands somewhere between 10 and 20% with its collective number, the alliance has to decide whether or not it works with the DA or a Ramaphosa-led ANC, which is a very, very interesting predicament.
Well, it depends on how those numbers pan out. And the first thing that I think is going to be very different from what happened in the local government elections and the last national elections is this absentee vote. One of the most important things that ARETA has given itself as task is to convey the message to those who are unhappy with this rogue African National Congress not to abstain, but to join and to vote for ARETA or for other political parties in this united front that I've spoken about so many times. I'm getting the message that we are succeeding with that call. And I think, you may be cynical about it, but I think
people from my township will not. I come from Inyanga in Cape Town. Those people, there's nothing you will say to them that will make them go vote, because their day-to-day experiences are it's like you because I get robbed next to the police
No,
station.
I agree with you about the day-to-day experience.
Yes.
Where I
would
may
take a lot-
disagree,
Sure.
where I may disagree with you is whether one cannot be able to convey the message that the way to deal with those terrible conditions is not to abstain, but to vote against the sell-out ANC government for a progressive program of radical economic transformation. And I think we are getting there. I think we are breaking through that no vote cynicism that is set in because of the failure of the African National Congress to deliver and the exploitation of the ANC of the people of this country.
What makes you positive about that?
The messages I get, the communication that I've had with many people in areas in the Eastern Cape, in Limpopo, also in the Free State, who say to me, I haven't voted last year, but now I'm going to vote. A very large part of the membership who've signed up now with ARETA are people who last year, during the last elections, did not vote, who abstained because they were cynical and unhappy about the ANC, but they found there was no other political home. Now they say to me, we're going to vote because we can see that the absence of our vote has not helped us. It just simply allowed, as you quite correctly analyzed, the power dynamic to remain the same, just at a lower percentage level. Now they say, we see that the only way in which we can change our lives is to vote. So our message is going to be a very straightforward one. If you want to see change, vote. But don't vote for the African National Congress. Vote for ARETA and other progressive parties. And that will be a critical central message of the 2024 elections. Bring out the vote. The vote can liberate you. If you vote right, if you vote for progressive forces, if you vote for radical economic transformation, your vote can count. If you abstain, that abstention counts for nothing. It becomes a zero.
It doesn't help.
It doesn't add to any change.
Doesn't help anyone.
It doesn't help anyone. So abstentions do not help. So the message we're going to bring out, strong, unequivocal, and everywhere in this country, is vote, but vote for change and vote for radical economic transformation. And I'm confident that that message is truly beginning to be accepted. What you saw, we started this conversation about the national shutdown. What you saw in the national shutdown was not abstention, was not cynicism, but people actually going out onto the streets in their hundreds of thousands, saying, no, we are taking a stand. So 2024 is going to be an election about the people of this country taking a stand and saying to the African National Congress, we've seen you, as that old biblical phrase goes, mene, mene, tekel ifarsen. The writing is on the wall. You have been weighed, you have been found too light, you will be thrown into the outer darkness. And the only way to do that is to vote, and to vote right.
All right. Last one from me to you. On a lighter note, how does it feel to be 60-something-year-old? How does it feel to be a 60-something-year-old man every day? How does it feel? Like, can you get up quicker? Are you slower in getting up? Do you get irritated less or more? How does it feel to be 60-something?
There's a beautiful poem by a Brazilian modernist poet. The poem says, "My soul wears a hat." And it's an amazing poem because it says, I've counted the candy in my little bag of candy, and I found that there are far less left than what I've already eaten. Therefore, I must make sure that I taste every one of this bit of candy that is left in full intensity. Therefore, I must make sure that I live my life to the fullest. So when you ask me, how does it feel to be 63? I've reached a stage of great intensity. I've reached the stage where I know I've got a number of years left where I can truly make a change. And I'm prepared to dedicate myself to eat that candy to the fullest, to make every day of my life now, until the day that I eventually go, count to the fullest. I sat there on the pavement together with Julius Malema. We were having some stony ginger beer. And he said to me, how old are you? I said, oh, must I tell you, Commander? He says, yes. I said, 63. He said, oh, God. I said, no, but you will understand the day you get to 63 how important experience is.
Absolutely.
And I'm grateful that I have the experience, because you know what the experience does? It loads my gun in a way that I will never be able to load it, aim it, and shoot it. Of course, I talk metaphorically, not really shooting a gun. And shoot and hit the target. That's why my crosshairs is the name of my Twitter space. In my crosshairs, I will hit the target. And next year, in this upcoming elections, ARETA is going to hit the target. And the ANC is going to know it. Mark my words.
And that's how you end the show. Thank you very much for joining us.